Today, we are with Phil Gwoke. Phil is a writer, market researcher, and generational expert with BridgeWorks, a company that has been dedicated to bridging the generational divide in the workplace and marketplace since 1998. Through their cutting-edge research and best-selling books, BridgeWorks has helped some of the country's best companies work through the inevitable clashes that can happen between traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation Xers, and millennials. From the AARP to MTV, they have been called on by business executives, politicians, and the media to share their expertise. Phil is a Generation Xer who grew up breakdancing and fixing cassette tapes with the eraser end of a number 2 pencil. And today, he is a renowned keynote speaker, generational expert, and we are absolutely thrilled to have him with us.
And this is the empty cup. We're just here to fill your cup back up. We know it's hard out here. We're not all getting fulfilled by the organizations and the cultures that we're in. And we're going to leave you with some tips and tidbits to fix that. Phil, welcome.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
You. Hey, we're gonna learn some good stuff. So I want to jump right in. Going through your website, we saw a term, and we want to know more about it. What is generational theory?
All right. It's a great place to start. Simply put, it's the study of time and people. We believe that people affect the times that they're living in, and the times that we're living in most certainly affect us as people. When you look at it from the study of the theory, we try to understand the unique events and conditions that shape a generational cohort, and this is really important, during their formative years. So whatever age you are, we're all experiencing the pandemic, but we would want to be really tuned into how it's shaping young people at a time of adolescence right now. Psychologists tell us that it is during your teenage years that your brains are almost in a position like wet cement is how I like to think of it. It's absorbing experiences in a very unique way. And as you mature through life, whatever you were exposed to at that time in your life kind of stays with you in a more profound way. It affects you for a long time. The example I like to use is most people, most of your listeners, I'm sure all of us at one time or another have found ourselves hearing a song over the radio in the car, in a store, and the song was popular when we were a teenager. It affects us almost physiologically. We begin to remember the type of, clothes we wore back then, how we styled our hair, the car we might have driven, that young person you were attracted to. It just invokes all these memories. And there's lots of great music we'll hear through our life, but something about that teenage music is really profound. How that shows up in the workplace, though, is when we're a teenager experiencing life, that's when we begin to develop in a unique way our preferred style of communication, the type of career we want to pursue, our beliefs about right, wrong, religion, truth, justice, very important topics of today, but each generational cohort has a unique perception or definition of each of those concepts. And so when it comes to the workplace, you've got 4 now, sometimes some places 5 generations working side by side, and you can throw a word at them like justice or truth or trustworthy, and it might be the same word, but each generation is perceiving their expectations around that word differently. And that introduces what we describe as clash points that we try to help people understand and fill their cups back up, if you will.
I mean, there's so many places to go within that, but in the spirit of organizational culture, not making any assumptions for the audience, why is it then important to understand the generational makeup of the organization?
Yeah, really important question. For us, as you mentioned in my bio, we've been talking about this since 1998. And the reason that's important is when we were first identifying some of these challenges and helping organizations wrestle with them, millennials were still in high school. Over the last decade, generational conversations have become more popular because of this phenomena called the millennial, and a lot of people jumped in the bandwagon. But it's way beyond any one generation. What happens in a work culture in particular is, well, let's just take that word work or work ethic. Since the dawn of time, you think about the new generation coming into the workplace or into the family business or the farm. You go back 1,000 years, I'm sure there was a grandparent that looked at their grandchild and said, "That's not how we used to milk a cow in our day." And
Kids
first
these
of all,
days. Kids these days.
yeah.
I'm
So
finding
first of
myself
all, it
saying
shows
it
like
now, you know?
we've all said it.
They
We've
don't
all
work as
just said
hard. They don't
kids
work as
these
hard.
days or old people, right? It doesn't matter. Every one of us have
It
found
doesn't
ourselves
matter.
there.
Every one of us. Yeah.
And so it confuses our definition of work ethic when someone approaches it differently. We might say, all right, I want to motivate this person to be better. And we think to ourselves, what would motivate me? And then we do for them what we wanted for us, but they're looking for an entirely different system to motivate them or engage them or build credibility. So yeah, that's why it's really important to understand what those unique experiences were so that then you can engage your entire workforce and not just the people that think like you.
Want to continue the organizational line because I have so many thoughts on what you just
So
said and
many.
places I can go. And I just have questions about my generation, which
I love
has been
questions.
deemed the nameless generation.
Yeah. That 79 to 82. Like, I got nothing.
What
I don't
are
know
we?
where I am.
Who knows?
Well, you want to talk about? Let's talk about it. So, it's a really good point I didn't address earlier because some people ask me, well, what are you said events and conditions? What are we talking about here? Sometimes there's profound moments in time that mark a big shift from one generation to the next. So, the shift between, say, the baby boomers and the generation that came before them was the end of World War II. That was a huge shift in time. What you're focusing on is there's something unique in that that time period between 78 and 82. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm showing up different than maybe a classic millennial, but I'm not like a Gen Xer that came before me. Where am I? So we refer to everyone who finds themselves on the border of a generational shift. We call you cuspers. And in our most recent book, we have a whole chapter dedicated to you. It's called Cusper, the Friendly Ghost. And it works on a couple.
I like it.
It works on a couple levels because one, cuspers often feel invisible, just like you said. I don't even know how I fall into that. I don't really fit here. But you're friendly because more often than not, you serve as generational translators. It's not surprising to me that you two gentlemen are hosting a conversation like this because it's almost been your unique experience is a bridge builder. You're right in the middle between two generations and saying we got to, hey, how can we help these people fill up their cup? How can we help them get together? Our research shows that people that are born on the border of two generations tend to advance in their careers quicker because, again, they serve as those that they're in that position of understanding a broader spectrum of people. And again, we're just talking generationally so far. We're gonna dive into some inclusive leadership, I believe, because we're gonna focus on how this can be applied across all different aspects of our human dynamic. But so yeah, I would always point out the name is irrelevant. I don't care what you call the person. What we try to focus on are what are their unique experiences and how does that shape the person or group of people that we're talking about.
I think that's a great distinction, and that's money. What is to kind of bring in some of the inclusivity a little bit? What's the biggest challenge for an organization uh, that is trying to ensure generational inclusivity?
Yes. So the interesting thing about generations as one of our lens of our human dynamic or human diversity. And please note, as a sociologist, as a student of people, I study personality theory. I study ethnicity and gender and all the aspects that make us who we are. So generations is one piece of it. And the interesting thing is it's the only lens of diversity that will eventually move from the entry level to every organization to the leadership, just by the nature of time. So when millennials came into the workforce, they were this anomaly that people didn't understand, much like Gen Xers before them were slackers and baby boomers before them were hippies, right? We always label the incoming new generation and what's wrong with them. And
They're all
eventually,
entitled.
now the oldest millennials turned 41 in 2021, and it won't be long before they're 51 and then 61, and they're at the reins of leadership. So on one hand, every generation will move through all the phases of an organization. So that's the good news. You can't say that about other lenses of diversity, unfortunately, yet. Eventually, women will be in charge of everything, or eventually, people of color will be at every position of leadership. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, but when it comes to generations, that does happen. The real challenge, though, is how can you create an inclusive mindset or an accepting mindset of every generation within the organization so that you don't make the mistake of labeling each other at either end of the spectrum. And so I would say the biggest challenge that organizations face when it comes to inclusivity is to remove the mindset that different is a problem. Because as I illustrated with boomers and Xers and millennials, and now Gen Z is on the horizon, so that when they do something the way that you wouldn't quite approach it, or maybe like Keith, I love the example of coaches saying, when I was coming up through, yes, we hazed each other. That was the rite of passage. Therefore, if it was good enough for me, it should be good enough for them. This isn't a problem. No. We have to accept that there's a different perspective, a different experience, a different mindset. So don't view their request for a different way of being led or coached or taught as a problem, but really have the mindset of, okay, they had a different experience. Let me adapt and welcome it.
I actually had an example of that last night where playing softball, and I was like, he's the best batter. He should bat cleanup. And somebody said, well, the current analytics say that your best batter should go first or second so they get more at bats. And that's what most teams are actually doing. And I was like, no, clean up.
So Rodney, a question for you: who was right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
No, I mean, if the current numbers show it, then that makes a lot of sense. And I had to consider it then. I was like, something I had never considered. But in the moment, it's just like, I'm not going to break down analytics right now. No. I'm going to go with
This
what I know.
is the way it was done. Yeah. That's
See,
good.
and that takes real powers of self-awareness to be open to a different paradigm. It's so easy to get locked into what we know, So one, I applaud you for breaking what you believe to be the right way and saying, oh, maybe I should consider a different perspective, because that's easier said than done. That's the biggest challenge. That's really, hard for people to do. It's hard for systems to do, but it is so rewarding, Did you win the game?
We did.
There you go.
We did. And we split the difference.
Okay.
We went third. And,
All right.
And
All
he
right.
knocked
Hey,
a few people in.
Hey.
compromise.
It worked.
So as we talk about, like, one of the things, and you said it, I think one of my favorite difficult conversation tips is to address differences, not try to find similarities right away, because if we try to find similarities, we feel ignored in our uniqueness. And like you talk about that with generations within an organization, which opens up this conversation that we've heard a lot within companies, is how do we maintain, how do we avoid attrition of millennials and Gen Zers, right? Specifically millennials, because Gen Zers are relatively new, but that's just going to be a continued phenomenon. Like, how does an organization address that at a generational level where they're seeing higher rates of millennial attrition?
Yes. Within our organization, we've identified, as nothing shocking here. There's recruitment, there's retention, there's engagement. How do you attract a demographic? What do you do to make sure they stay there? And while they're there, they're not just there. They're giving their best. They're fully engaged in the work. And so for each of those categories, we have key indicators underneath that we try to help organizations ask the question, what pieces, there are these 6 or 7 or 8 different indicators that might make your organization attractive to, or make it a place that they want to stay. Probably any organization is pretty good at 2 or 3 or 4 of those, but maybe it's that 5th and 6th one that they're falling short on, their 7th and 8th one. So it's different for each group, but I'm going to use one as an example. So I just want to make sure that people understand this isn't the only thing that you need to do to retain a particular generation, but it's an example of how you could approach it. I do a lot of presentations, and I sometimes would ask my audience members, especially people my age and older, when you started your job and the boss said jump, what was the right answer? And it used to be how high, that was
How
it.
high.
And then I'd say, all right, so when you ask millennial joins your organization and you ask them to jump, what do they say? And audiences,
Why?
unanimously, why? And herein lies the problem. Herein lies not the problem, but the opportunity to grow. And we would say, the assumption people have is this person's being disrespecting me. Who are you to challenge my authority? I told you to jump. You shouldn't question me. But the reality is millennials had a different experience growing up. Parents, the family structure, would have more conversations. I come out of an education background. I worked with a school in a city where the principal used to do a thing called pizza with the principal. This is when millennials were coming of age. And every week he would invite 8 to 10 students into his office, buy them pizza for lunch, ask how they could make the school a better place. Now, this was in 1999, 2000. The question you want to ask yourself is, why would a principal do that? No principal ever did that for me when I was growing up. The answer was, this was just after the Columbine shooting. So every principal in America was wrestling with, do my students feel safe here? Might there be a student that might do something like that? If they are, I want to find them ahead of time. So they invited young people to speak up, to share their voice, to be a part of making the school better. And it began to shape a generational mindset. So when millennials come in and say, well, why? Tell me why I should jump. It's not so much disrespect as it is, I want to be a part of the solution. I want to help this thing grow. Many show up with that mindset, not all, because there's always individual exceptions, but many, that's the desire. So to create an environment that would retain millennials, you want to create a space where they feel like they have a voice, where they can speak into how do we make this better, that you demonstrate you are adaptable to continue growth and change. And then all of a sudden it starts to feel like what they grew up with. This was how my principal created the environment. This is how my parents created our home environment. This must be a place that I want to stay in. So again, I want to be clear, that's just one example, but you try to understand what experiences they had, how that shaped their value proposition, and then see that as valuable for your organization and not just a problem of disrespectful young people entering. Now, what's interesting is the shift is happening again, because when Gen Z are showing up and you tell them to jump, they're not saying how high, but they're not necessarily saying why. Many times they're saying how. Show me how to jump. See, I grew up in a YouTube world where anytime I had a question, I could watch a frame-by-frame video showing me exactly how I accomplished the goals that I'm striving toward. So if you just tell me to jump without showing me how, I'm probably going to sit back and wait for someone to give me a little bit of additional coaching. So now that millennials are hiring managers and they're the ones who are leading the next generation, they might lead with, let me tell you why this is great. And Gen Z will look at them and say, that's fine and dandy, but tell me how I should go about making this great. You see, so for each generational experience, you got to be ready to shift. And that's the fun.
It reminds me of first principle thinking. And especially with the why, but even with the how, we all, those of us that are owners or have a thing, all like to think that we would hire people that would challenge us to be better. But in reality, we tend to hire people that agree with us.
Yeah.
And it takes work to have somebody say why when you're like, do this thing. And like, well, is that the best thing for the company? Keith and I went through this yesterday. Like, why did this happen? And I'm sure, like, it's not fun for me when it happens because I made the decision. That's why it happened. But should we continue doing it because you made the decision or because we've always done it this way?
All right, we're going to take a pause right there. Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of this conversation with Phil Gwoke. And if you're interested in our other platform, the More in Common podcast, where we dive deep into a lot of conversations and we get to know people for who they are, not just what they think, and we really try to demonstrate compassionate conversation, there's a conversation with Ogie, episode 93, that really talks in depth about generational trauma and generational influence on our psyche and how we move forward. So it's a different spin to this dialogue, but it would be a great conversation if you're interested in the topic. Check it out. We'll be back in a couple days.